again. The king has just had confirmation that God will indeed exercise his wrath against Judah, but Josiah personally will not live through the chaos. That's bad news and good news, if I ever heard any. With that knowledge, he calls for a meeting of all the elders of Judah and of Jerusalem. Hi, I'm Ken Godevanis, and this is Digging for Scriptural Gems. We're going to pick up the story from there. Today, we're studying 2 Kings chapter 22, verses 1 to 14. I hope you find it as interesting as I do. This group of people that were supporting the king, or that he called upon, kept getting bigger. The text says, all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, all the priests, the prophets, the people, small and great, joined Josiah as he went up to the house of the Lord. And there he found the book of the covenant, and he started reading it in their hearing. Now, verse 3 says, the king stood by the pillar and made a covenant before the Lord to walk after God and to keep his commandments, his testimonies, and his statutes with all his heart and soul, and to carry out the words of this covenant in the book. And here's the kicker. The text says, quote, and all the people entered into the covenant. That is, they agreed with what he was saying and wanted to be part of it. Now in verse 4, Josiah commands the priests to take all the vessels or idolatry items from that were made for Baal, for Asherah, and all the stars of heaven, all the idols made for them. He had them burned in Kidron and their ashes sent to Bethel. Furthermore, he got rid of all the idolatrous or pagan priests and those who burned incense to Baal and others. He burned the Asheroth and threw the ashes on the graves of the common people in the public graveyard, as opposed to the upper classes who would have had private tombs at that time. But wait, there's more. He broke down the houses of the male cult prostitutes found in God's house, where the women were weaving hangings or shrines for the Asheroth. It seems to me Sodom and Gomorrah had nothing on this moral corruption. In verse 8, he then gets the priests to decimate the high places. But in verse 9, we're told the priests of the places didn't go to the altar of the Lord in Jerusalem. That was true. He stopped them from doing that. But they were allowed to eat unleavened bread among their brothers. In verse 10, we're told Josiah got rid of Topheth in the valley of the son of Hinnom, so no one might pass their son or daughter through the fire of Moloch. You'll remember we mentioned that a few times in recent studies. And in verse 11, we are told he did away with the statues of horses, which previous kings of Judah had given to the sun at the entrance of the Lord's house. And he burned the chariots of the sun with fire. I assume statues of chariots as well. I don't know. And remember the altars that were built in the palaces for the convenience of the previous kings? Think Ahaz and Manasseh. Well, they were broken and smashed and their dust thrown into the brook of Kidron. He also destroyed, or the text says he defiled, the high places before Jerusalem that were to the right of the Mount of Destruction that Solomon had built for various other gods. Now, some commentators, or editors rather, believe that this is a derogatory name for the Mount of Olives that we hear of in the New Testament. This was the old name, derogatory for it, called the Mount of Destruction. He also broke in pieces the sacred pillars and cut down the Asherim and filled the places where the Asherim were and where the sacred pillars were. He filled those spots with human bones. We're going to stop there and dig further. Clearly, as verses 4 to 14 show us, the extent of King Josiah's reformation in Judah was extensive. In verse 14 of this chapter, we read that after he destroyed the high places and took down the false idols, he filled the spaces they left, as I had just mentioned, with human bones. Robert Jameson says, quote, "The presence of a dead carcass rendered both the persons and places unclean in the eyes both of Jews and heathens," end of quote. Now, not sure, and we can quibble over this, if bones equate to a carcass, but you get the message that Josiah was communicating. I also mentioned above that we would come back and comment on the idolatrous priests in verse 9 of our passage. Or if I hadn't mentioned that, I'm mentioning it now, and here we are. They weren't allowed to oversee altar sacrifices any longer, but they were allowed to eat unleavened bread with other priests. What this highlights is King Josiah's balanced approach to reform, combining strict adherence to divine law with mercy. While removing idolatrous high place priests from serving at the Jerusalem temple altar, he permitted them to eat unleavened bread among their brethren, honoring their priestly lineage while punishing their disobedience. There's a lesson there for us as well. We don't need to destroy people, but we do need to see that justice is done. Next time, we're going to learn about the climax of Josiah's reformation of Judah. Join us for that. In the meantime, if you like what you're seeing or hearing, please indicate so on the video you're watching. If you haven't already subscribed, go to YouTube and put in "Digging for Scriptural Gems." Make sure it's the right one. Digging for Scriptural, not spiritual, but Scriptural Gems. And sign up to be notified of changes. But in the meantime, the most important thing is that you keep studying your Bible. Have a good couple of days. We'll talk with you soon.